What if one of history's most famous science versus religion stories isn't actually true the way most people think? We've all heard the simplified version. Galileo proved that Earth revolves around the sun. The Catholic Church refused to accept science and then punished him for telling the truth. It's often presented as the ultimate example of religion crushing scientific progress. But what if the real story is far more complicated than that? What if Galileo's trial wasn't just about astronomy, but also about evidence, politics, ego, and a direct clash with church authority? Because once you look past the myth, the Galileo story stops being a simple battle between science and religion and starts becoming something much more human. The case of Galileo Galilei is often used as proof that science and religion can never coexist. According to the popular version of history, Galileo discovered that the Earth moves around the sun. The church hated the idea, and so it silenced him to protect its power. It's a dramatic story. The problem is, history is rarely that simple. To understand what actually happened, we have to go back to the early 17th century, when Europe's understanding of the universe was still in transition. At the time, the dominant model was the Ptolemaic system, which placed Earth at the center of the cosmos. But a competing idea, heliocentrism, the view that Earth revolves around the sun, had already been proposed by Copernicus. Galileo became one of the most famous supporters of this heliocentric model. Using a telescope, he made remarkable observations of the night sky. He observed the moons of Jupiter, the phases of Venus, and details on the moon that challenged older assumptions about the heavens. These discoveries were groundbreaking, and they clearly showed that the universe was more complex than people had previously believed. But here's the crucial part. Galileo's observations did not yet provide absolute proof that Earth itself moved around the sun. That's the part many modern retellings leave out. At the time, Galileo was not simply told, "You're wrong because the Bible says so." In fact, he was asked to provide stronger evidence for his claims. The church, like many scholars of the era, wanted a convincing demonstration that the heliocentric model explained reality better than the older geocentric one. And Galileo, despite his brilliance, could not fully deliver that proof in a way that would settle the debate. From a modern perspective, we know Galileo was moving in the right direction, but in his own time, the scientific case was not as airtight as people today imagine. Some of the strongest proof for Earth's motion would only come later. If the story ended there, Galileo might simply have gone down in history as a controversial scientist pushing a bold theory before the evidence was complete. But the situation escalated for another reason. Galileo's conflict with authority became personal. Galileo didn't just defend heliocentrism. He increasingly framed the disagreement in a way that challenged the authority and judgment of powerful figures within the Roman Catholic Church. His relationship with Pope Urban VIII deteriorated, and what had been a scientific and theological dispute began turning into a political and personal confrontation. That matters because institutions rarely respond to public humiliation with calm detachment. Galileo's trial, then, was not just about science versus faith. It was about a scientist who believed he was right, a church that believed he had not yet proven his case, and a growing power struggle over who had the authority to define truth in public. That doesn't mean the church handled the situation well. It didn't. And it certainly doesn't mean Galileo was treated fairly by modern standards. But it does mean the popular image of a lone scientist being crushed simply for discovering truth is incomplete. The real story is messier, and that messiness leads to a bigger question. Does Galileo's case prove that religion and science are natural enemies? Not necessarily. History gives us plenty of examples where religion and science did not exist as opposites. Many early scientists were deeply religious. Gregor Mendel, the father of genetics, was a friar. Religious institutions preserved knowledge, funded scholarship, and in many periods played a major role in education and scientific inquiry. Even within Christianity, the relationship between faith and science has never been one single story. Sometimes it was conflict, sometimes cooperation, sometimes both at once. Even the common claim that the medieval church believed in a flat earth is mostly a myth. Educated people in the Roman Catholic tradition had long accepted the earth as spherical, drawing on ancient Greek knowledge. The flat earth church stereotype was largely exaggerated later for polemical reasons. So what should we take from the Galileo story? Maybe the lesson is not that science and religion are doomed to fight forever. Maybe the real lesson is that whenever truth, power, institutions, and human pride collide, the conflict becomes bigger than the original idea. Galileo was not just caught between science and religion. He was caught between evidence and certainty, discovery and authority, personality and power. And that's why his story still matters today. Because even now in the modern world, debates over truth are rarely just about facts alone. They are also about who gets to speak, who gets to decide, and what happens when a new idea threatens an old system. So can science and religion work together? History suggests the answer is yes, but not perfectly, not always, and not without tension. Sometimes religion has resisted scientific change. Sometimes it has nurtured it. Sometimes scientists themselves have made the conflict worse. And sometimes institutions, religious or secular, have reacted defensively when their authority was challenged. The Galileo story is important not because it gives us a simple answer, but because it reminds us to distrust simple answers in the first place, because the truth is harder than the myth. And that's exactly what makes it worth understanding. If you enjoyed this deeper look into the real history behind Galileo's trial, and you want more videos that challenge popular myths with facts, context, and analysis, subscribe to Analysis with Rahat. Drop a comment and tell me this. Do you think Galileo's trial was mainly about science, religion, or power? And if you want more history, geopolitics, and war analysis that goes beyond the surface, hit like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.